The first speaker, Will Sagar, will explain the importance of getting the community involved in providing the material feedstock and how that process, apart from being beneficial to the environment, creates jobs. Will is the Executive Director of the Southeast Recycling Development Council, SERDC. SERDC's mission is to unite industry, government, and non-government organizations to promote sustainable recycling in the Southeast. SERDC's specific focus is to educate people regarding the economic impact of recycling, which is not often appreciated. Will graduated from the University of North Carolina with a double major in economics and mathematics. He comes to his position at SERDC from the vantage point of being in the trenches. Some of his past experiences include building and operating an excavation business for 10 years, being the solid waste director for Transylvania County, North Carolina for 16 years, where he started previously non-existent recycling and electronic collection programs, and a county energy accounting system. So Will, I'd like to invite you up.
Would like to share with you some research that SERDC has done over the last 3 years. We did this in collaboration with EPA Region 4 to quantify the manufacturing impact that occurs in the Southeast resulting from our recycling programs and what's happened over the last 20 years. I started my first recycling program in 1989 where we converted old green box sites on the sides of the road into convenience centers, meaning instead of being there 24/7, we had them staffed with hours, and we told everybody that was more convenient, that they weren't open on Sundays. But it gave us control of the waste stream. We were able to bring into compliance so that we could stop putting things like tires and white goods into landfills and start collecting newspapers, plastic bottles, and aluminum cans for recycling. In 1989, 1990, and following, some of these materials were very hard to move. Some of you may remember newspaper stories in the early 90s of warehouses full of baled newspaper looking for homes. I had a shop with barrels of soda bottles looking for homes. It's a different world today. We have got demand for this material. There is a manufacturing infrastructure across the Southeast, and I want to take a look specifically at the jobs that are created from the material in the recycling bin and what that economic impact is, and a look at what that means to our taxes and possible contributions to state tax revenues as states are all struggling with their budgets these days. A little disclosure of who funds what we do. It just gives an insight to know where my money comes from. These are the people that make my house payments and put gas in the car. But this is who drives what we do, and you will hear from one of those companies shortly following my talk, Mr. Gardner from Novellis. SERDC undertook to try to identify and quantify those manufacturing facilities in the region that relied on recycling material that came out of our regular programs to use as feedstock for manufacturing. We screened the manufacturing facilities across 11 states down to try to identify just those that relied wholly or in part on recycling material. We didn't want to include people that casually used it. We didn't want to use people that didn't use it intentionally. It may be intentionally, it may be by choice, it may be the only way they could find their material, or it may have been an economic choice for them to use recycled material. And we wanted to make sure it was wholly. We didn't identify car manufacturers, so there's lots of recovered material in automobiles, but we did look specifically at some of those, like Viam Manufacturing in Tennessee, that's making the carpet that goes into those automobiles, or Unify in North Carolina that's making the seat covers for Ford Focus and others. But we narrowed that down, and we found 206 manufacturing facilities employing 47,000 people across the region. Their economic contribution is right at $30 billion a year. These are last year's numbers, and I have every indication and expectation that that number will be higher in the coming years. Selected just a few of the states across the region to take a look at and give an insight into what is going on. In Alabama, we've got 26 facilities. Alabama is host to KW Plastics. That's the largest HDPE processor in the world. down in Lower Alabama, L.A., as they say. That's L.A. on our side of the country. In Troy, Troy is basically a town that is owned by it's not owned by, but KW is a huge presence there because they are the major employer. They're behind everything that happens civically, sponsoring it, making it happen. It's a huge company. The entire state of Alabama, in all of their recycling programs, collects enough material for KW to run 1.5 shifts. Between now and midnight, they can use everything collected in an entire year in the state of Alabama. They can't feed it. So KW is reaching throughout the region, throughout the country, and even overseas to get the feedstock they need so that they can take old bottles, old buckets, and expanding into some mixed rigids, what we would call yard plastic, swing sets and such. And out of their output are pellets that are going to go into injection molding, blow molding, and other to become consumer goods again. But we're not generating the material right there where we need it. South Carolina saw the exodus of a strong textile base. A lot of tobacco business left South Carolina many years ago. Their Department of Commerce focused on recycling as early as 1991 as a growth sector. In 1991, the only other people I'm aware of that talked about recycling were people that were indeed environmentalists and were working to save trees. But South Carolina had the vision that there was an economic advantage to working in recycling. It's paying off for them. In the last 2 years, private investment of $750 million in recycling businesses in South Carolina created 1,900 jobs. I've got a misprint in there, I'm sorry. And most of 40 of those are new or expanded businesses, but this is private investment. There wasn't any state support for that to happen. They just created a culture and a networking system for the Department of Commerce, and they lobbied a sector to bring in these materials and created those jobs. Georgia is the third largest consumer in the country of recycled feedstock. The odds are very good that you're standing on carpet or you've walked on carpet today that came out of North Georgia. They are consuming in that carpet business there 1/3 of all the soda bottles that are recovered in the country go through Georgia. You are in contact with them on a regular basis. Georgia's big on paper. There's 11 paper mills in Georgia relying on recovered paper, and those companies, not just in those mills, but those companies have got $1 billion payroll. Some of that's virgin material, but they're heavily reliant, particularly Caraustar, SP, Georgia Pacific in Georgia, using lots of recovered paper. In my home state, we've got 30 facilities. We're host to the country's largest PET processor, our #1 plastic soda bottles. That plastic is, a lot of that headed back to Georgia to be made into fiber. Some of it's going to Unify other places, but we've got 16 plastic manufacturing processors in North Carolina, employing 1,250 people, and just in plastics they're putting out $250 million a year in annual sales. Huge impact on our local economy. North Carolina's Department of Environment and Natural Resources has performs a biennial survey of the jobs in recycling industry. My SERDC data just looks at those in the manufacturing sector. DENR, or Environment and Natural Resource numbers, look at everybody involved, collection, processing, those beyond just the end users, and are demonstrating growth on a consistent basis. Most importantly, between July of 2008 and July of 2010, they had a 5% growth in the number of jobs. This during the worst recession of our generation. And while the rest of the state experienced 10% unemployment, this sector is growing. There are efficiencies in recycling. Almost every recycling process uses less energy than if we were using virgin material. You will hear from aluminum and the focus here, and their savings on recycling input is huge. But we also, even paper, plastic, steel, all of them use less energy to put a new product back out when we're using recycled content. That's a cost savings, and we're seeing energy prices continue to get higher and higher. We also have transportation savings when we substitute recycled material for virgin feedstock because a lot of the material is right indeed in front of us. It's coming out of our urban centers. Our urban mining is a whole new experience rather than extracting from a faraway forest. We're documenting that growth. Here in Kentucky, you've got 17 manufacturing facilities. Kentucky's home to the largest primary aluminum processor in the country. But in Kentucky, your local governments are paying tipping fees of $17 million a year to bury aluminum cans. They're right here in front of you. What could your local governments do with an additional $17 million that they've lost? And what could Novelis, Alcoa, and others do with that same material? We've put all this information together into an interactive map that resides on our website. The resolution in this slide has gotten a little skewed, but this is just a regular Google-type format that anybody should know how to do. Our material, each dot is one of the 206 manufacturing facilities. If you click on that dot, you'll get information about what feedstock they use, what type of products come out of that plant, the number of employees, the annual sales they have, and a link to their website so you can get more information. We want to get this information to elected decision makers so that they'll know that their investment in their recycling programs is going to do more than just divert their tipping fees or divert their materials so they don't pay as much in tipping fees, but they're actually create local investment in recycling is going to lead to regional job growth. We've got to get that message to the elected decision makers. That's why the map is up there in a simple format so we can zero in on a congressman's or state representative's district so he can see the jobs that indeed lie in and around where he comes from, that we have that impact there. We've got lots of tools for recycling coordinators to talk to the public, but we've got to get the message to the elected decision makers that our policies and our funding drive our recovery. We've had significant expansion and through the years for what we do. PET now, we've got plastic being recycled into food grade material. Instead of, we've got out of the bins, we can take plastic and use it for food packaging and meet FDA approval. We never dreamed of that 10 years ago, but the technology keeps advancing and we can do more and more, and so the capacity to process it's growing, and in PET capacity increased 50% last year alone. Fortunately, it has increased to 1.8 billion pounds, and we're only collecting 1.4 and shipping 40% of that overseas. And yet we still see, even this year, announcements of plants adding more because there's such an opportunity to be had. At the same time, we've got idle industrial capacity waiting for feedstock, and 3 out of 4 of all of our plastic bottles are headed towards landfills. We can feed this, employ people, the equipment's there, but we've got to change the behavior to capture the material. There's lots of local incentive programs. Pay as you throw, where we meter the amount of waste that come out and from a household and charge accordingly. Waste collection is the last unmetered utility. You've got one truck that comes by, just like you have one power company, one phone company, one cable company. You only want one garbage truck in your community, but you need to pay by how much you use. If it's an all-you-can-eat buffet, and when you set it out each week, there's no incentive to do any more. Recycle Bank is a tool that's out there where people are getting rebates. Recycle and Win is a lottery-type incentive program that has shown great effects. They just launched Roanoke. It's throughout cities from Atlanta to Charleston, Raleigh, Durham. SERDC seeks that at the state level, we want to get this information to those elected decision makers so we can have better planning requirements. Local governments are frontline in handling our materials, and we need to make sure that they're planning and looking down and making the investments in their diversion and setting higher goals that we can capture the material to feed this manufacturing capacity. We need state policies that put funding mechanisms in place to do that, and there's a lot of dialogue out there on extended producer responsibility, where the producer of the product is indeed investing in the capture of their product back when the consumer is finished with it. We want to advocate for local level investment in their infrastructure, again, to look at pay-as-you-throw, support their outreach, and look at regional collaboration. We, as was Liz said in the introduction, we do want to bring government and industry together for sustainable recycling and to put more emphasis that this is not an environmental movement anymore. Indeed, this is an economic reality to be where we want to be. And I thank you very much. There was a lot of our information resides on our website, and I appreciate it. Thank you.